Welcome back, everyone, to this breakout room number one. Topic for today is actually managing complexity and a move towards greater supply chain resilience from a MNC's perspective. Good afternoon, Roxanne. How are you?
Good afternoon, Jerry. I'm good.
So our speaker today is Roxanne Deschmich. She's the Vice President for Global Supply Chain at AMS AG, an organization with a global presence across Europe and Asia that covers the whole scope of supply chain functions. Roxanne has long-standing experience in the tech industry and brings her extensive experience to apply in supply chain transformation for value creation. She also sits on advisory committees for the Industrial System Engineering faculty at the National University of Singapore. Prior to AMS, she was product engineer, program manager within the Thales Group, a front-end yield manager at Altis Semiconductor, and supply chain director for several years at Infineon China. Now let us dive straight into the matter at hand. Roxanne, I would like to ask you, how does an MNC views resilience, example your inventory buffers, your lead times, your financial consideration, and how has this actually crisis impacted the semiconductor industry in terms of demand disruption, supply disruptions, and workforce impact?
So I think first, when we talk about resilience, the importance is always to be prepared for different scenarios. And to react, because this helps you to react fast, which is obviously very important, particularly when you are facing a crisis. So in our case, we have on hand a strong business continuity plan, which gives us guidance as of what to do when facing a crisis, what to structure, what kind of team to put together, as well as what to do in a normal way to be prepared for a crisis. So if I start with the second element, which is ongoing plan of being prepared, it's all about stocking points, so making sure that you have healthy WIP in your pipeline throughout the chain. Healthy in the sense that it should neither be too high nor too low. So having clear targets and clear monitoring of those inventories so that you take the proper action should it fall below the target or go above the target. As well as finding ways, if we look at more the transportation network, of ensuring that you have a vibrant partnership with different players who have skills to offer in different lanes, be it a blend between integrator and global forwarder. So maybe as a disclaimer, I should say the semicon industry tends to fly a lot. So I will not talk about ocean freight or too much of trucking, but it's really looking at your air freight partner and being able to leverage on different capability. So that when a disruption comes, you have different means to face this disruption. And this really helped us in facing this recent COVID-19 situation in the way of being able to leverage priorities, go into a higher freight mode so that we could speed up the carryover from supplier to our manufacturing side to avoid any disruption. And if I go to facing a disruption, I think the importance for us was from the very early stage to form a global task force to look at different aspects. So to look obviously on protecting our people and our employees, and thus sharing best practice throughout our different sites, being able to react to government direction. So this was one aspect of the task force. And of course, the second aspect of the task force is to make sure that we look at our supply and make sure that we have proper visibility, proper information throughout with the different partners, because there is an important term in supply chain is chain. So it's not that we are behaving or reacting or operating in isolation. We have an upstream chain which comes from our supplier, maybe from our supplier. And we have a downstream chain which goes into our different manufacturing sites towards our customer and maybe our customer. And this is where creating transparency, visibility, adapting the different nodes to upstream reaction help us to make best plan and to know from an organization perspective how we were performing along that plan. To capture any new information and thus to come up with updated plan so that we could communicate downstream what is going to happen. What was also very important is, I think in the previous plenary, you were discussing about technology. Yes, technology is important. But I think in such a disruption, it's also your connection with your supplier, your partnership, which helps to pull you through. Because that's through partnerships that you have a common goal and common desire to fulfill. And this maybe a digital platform might not help. Obviously, the digital platform is there to create this visibility I was talking about, to make sure information flow is transparent, so that you as a human together with your partners, be it internal partners or external partner, can make the best decision. So I think from a MNC perspective, that would be really the two angles. So which is having a plan, so which is what's the purpose of a business continuity plan, which we review regularly so that we can also enhance this plan. I think that will be also the opportunity after once we have stabilized completely the COVID-19 crisis, we can also revisit that plan to make it even stronger for better preparation for the next time. So making sure that this plan is up to date, so that you know who are the people to be called for in this global task force I was talking about. And then making sure you focus on execution, you focus on the sharing information and making things transparent. And bringing a lot of collaboration.
Roxanne, as a veteran in the industry, and having survived so many previous crises, how is this one any different?
I think this one is broader. So it's and that's where we in our case we saw two stages of the crisis. The first was after Chinese New Year, where most of the disruption was coming from China. And once China was maybe on the recovery path, that's where the second round of disruption started to come. With lockdown measures in Europe, and then maybe actually a third ripple with the lockdown in Asia. So first in Malaysia, in the Philippines, and then later on in Singapore. So I think compared to previous crises, so if we would remember, there was I think the latest most dramatic might have been either the Fukushima tsunami or the ash cloud in Iceland. I think that's on top of my mind. There was flooding in Thailand as well in between, but I think the Fukushima and the ash cloud was the biggest one. But the perimeter of the disruption was reasonably limited under bracket. So thus the implication, it affected a part of the business, but not as broadly as what we've seen with COVID-19. So I think that's really the where we had to be even more skilled than in the previous case. But of course, we could leverage in some of the practice in the previous natural disaster to react to this current crisis.
So I'm just going to narrow down our conversation into the air freight sector, because of the nature that the industry, the semiconductor industry, is designed. Now, we know that we've been experiencing bottlenecks, yeah, and disruption in the supply chain from increased border controls, insufficient, air freight capacity, and to a certain extent, labor shortage also as well, due to the safe distancing measures. So how have you, within a short period of time, managed to navigate these challenges while hoping to maintain some reasonable service level to your customers?
This is what I was referring to before. So it has always been our desire to have multiple partners for, multiple, the term is a bit too strong, a couple of very good partners for our transportation. And all of them had some different strengths in different areas throughout the crisis. And thus we worked very closely with them to find alternative to newly coming bottleneck. And thus playing around with their different skills, this is what helped us to minimize any sort of disruption. Of course, monitoring circumstances with local authority also was helpful, so that we could react fast on any change. So if I remember in the Philippines, there was a point in time where the custom were reducing work, and there was starting to have some lockdown in between different provinces. But then we also learned that you could gain cross-province permit, and thus we were very, very prompt in calling for those permits. So that, again, when you hear about what is going to change first time and in the prime, you have a first mover advantage. So I think this is also the value we have demonstrated throughout this crisis, is our ability to act in a very agile way, which is maybe the one of the core value of AMS, and maybe this is what we are still able to do as MNC. We are still able to operate with almost the agility of a startup, and this is extremely important when you face a disruption. Is this capability to capture what is going to happen, to have the right. This is built through times, because it means you need to also have the right connection. The right relationship with the important player in your food chain, if I say it like this. Thus, you get the information first. Thus, you have a first mover advantage, and thus you can fare better than maybe a competitor or another company. And I think this was really very essential. To keep this connection with our different players, to be able to capture trends and find together the best way forward.
So you are not just big and raw, strong, but you are also agile as well. That's great to hear. At this point of time, Roxanne, I'm going to take on a question from a Miss Pauline Wee. So she's curious to know whether the pandemic gave you this opportunity to work with partners you never would have considered before. And has this pandemic reshaped the way you think about value creation and business development opportunities?
Um, I would say at large, not really, because um, we have also to manage properly our resources and effort, and really their focus was to make sure we could continue to operate and to make sure we could move things around. Creating a new relationship takes some time, and thus might not be the right thing to do in such a time frame. Of course, it could have been throughout that there has been one or the other exception. So typically, particularly at the beginning in China, where we might have gone through intermediate partner, which were not our usual players. But this usually was handled by our logistics service provider, not by us directly. So they were pulling from their own network. So they were maybe not the trucking company we were using traditionally, but this was a known trucking company for our logistics service provider. So I think it's the time is maybe after the crisis, once we reflect to see whether there are some opportunity for further diversification in one area or the other, if we have identified some points where we could have done better, and that's going to be the lessons learned activity we will do in once we have resumed a fully stable environment. But during a crisis, I would really not do that.
Perfectly understand. Now I'm going to now move on to some HR issues and questions. How have MNCs actually coped with a limited human resource due to this safe distancing that we are talking about, especially on the floor? And also, what about staff that are working remotely? Can you give some examples, to address workers, for example, mental health, emotional well-being, and physical safety, to workforce protection measures in these trying times?
So in this way, we were very much in sync. So if I focus particularly on Singapore, so we have been all along very much in sync with government guideline. And in some way anticipating some of those guidelines as well. So if I take the example of my team, I think we decided to go on a staggered workforce already back mid of March. So which was much earlier than the circuit breaker, which came beginning of April. From two perspectives. So one was, again, looking at business continuity to make sure that there will be always resources available to work. And thus, because we were on a staggered workforce, this also helped us when the measures in social safe distancing got introduced. This really helped us to comply to these safe distancing measures. I think we got a lot of support from our facility, so our facility department. We did a lot of nice marking in our offices so that we would know where to sit, where not to sit. And they really look at beefing up the filter in the office, making sure there would be all the ample supply of hand sanitizer displayed and in various areas. We took a lot of action to close down the pantry, so that might not have been a very popular act, but that was obviously a needed step. And then if you talk about mental health, so if I would talk about my own department, so we had recently our, we call it town hall meeting. And then what we decided for this town hall meeting is maybe not only to talk about project and business trend, we also took maybe half of the time to talk about how people were coping during this work from home and disruptive time. So we did a mini survey along. So if I hope people in the audience are familiar with the change curve. So we did a mini survey to see how people were along the change curve. The result came surprisingly good, that most people were already in the either adopting the new way or in the ramp up phase. So it was more positive than I actually would think. And then we did a sharing session. So a couple of my staff volunteered to share their experience throughout the journey. So how they adapted, how from being very disrupted, they suddenly set up their office in their home. They managed to cope with a lot of kids around to find their own space so that they could still continue to work. And I think that's to address it in such an open way. So I received a lot of very positive feedback. But before that, because this was done maybe a couple of weeks ago, before that we made sure that we had still a lot of contacts with our people. So I have Joe Fix with all my staff every week. And whether you do it from phone or whether you do it with visual, with a face-to-face, doesn't really matter. So the importance is to spend the time. And maybe make also an effort to not only jump into operational topic, but also to bring in the conversation the social elements, so that you would also get a feeling as of how people are feeling about the situation, and be able to empathize with their circumstances and give them the proper encouragement. So I think this is also an opportunity. I mean, I think I should say there should be a lot of Chinese speaking in the audience. So I think we all know the Weiji is a crisis and opportunity. So I think this crisis also gives us opportunity to develop and to further sharpen our leadership skills. Our connectivity with our people, so establishing a trust relationship. And as well as maybe showing our value as human in the office versus digital tools.
Can see and appreciate you still have a little bit of your Chinese influence from your days in Infinite.
Something like this, yes.
So one question that I meant to ask you also is with regards to Industry 4.0, right? How have you leveraged on Industry 4.0, especially during this time, and to what extent has it actually been an advantage for you that you are the first mover in a situation when a crisis like this? How has it helped you?
I think.
And can you give some examples as well, like in what way?
I think the benefit of Industry 4.0, so particularly in supply chain, so for those who are familiar with the framework, so or for those who are actually maybe not familiar with the framework. So Industry 4.0 look at three different elements. So one is the vertical integration, which is exactly integration within the factory. One is the horizontal integration, which is integration across factory and with customer. And the last is digital integration, which is how you track your intelligent products throughout the chain. I think in circumstances like this, obviously it helps in creating, from a supply chain perspective, if you have system which gives you visibility as of what is happening within your overall supply network, you get an advantage. Whether you want to leverage everything on the digital capability, most likely not, because as all of you know, most of the model, be it statistic or be it AI, leverage on learning data. So AI engine is very smart on what it has learned before. When you face a crisis, I think the engine might be a little bit at a loss because there has not been training data as of how do you react in a crisis. So I think where we leverage is on tools which gives us visibility, which gives us the ability to make the best decision. But the decision taken over by the human is even more important when you face such a crisis, because you have to react fast, and thus you might not be willing to wait for another engine run. You might want to capture an opportunity. So could be, I don't know, you have the chance to charter a plane with somebody else. You want to capture this opportunity. You don't want to think for another 2 weeks before making a decision. So I think you have to combine. So my biggest learning out of this crisis, honestly, is if you would have asked me maybe 2 years ago, I was all about going digital. I was all about leveraging on statistics, all about questioning myself as of what was the future of work. With this crisis, I think it's where you see exactly how human and machine will partner together in the future for enhanced results. So there is not a competition between the human and the machine. It's really a collaboration where the machine helps you to have access to more information than what we had before, so that you can make more informed decision. But you still need you are still needed to make those decisions. And I think that's the biggest learning I had on this. Obviously, in Industry 4.0 and all the aspect of automation which comes behind helps you to tackle manpower crunch if you are in such a situation. So that definitely helps. But I guess at the end of the day, you still need to balance between how much automation you bring versus how much you still need to take control, particularly for very specific and complicated case as a crisis.
So as much as we leverage on automation, on digitalization, on 4.0, the human element is still essential and still critical when it comes to the decision-making process. We've got an interesting question here. We're going to back up a little bit on the HR journey that you were explaining and sharing earlier on. It's from Mr. Glenn Tan. And he wants to know basically, how did you manage the small percentage of the naysayers or the difficult to change employees, especially with minimal face-to-face engagement now? So do you tell them to take a permanent leave and stay home permanently, or what?
No, I think it has been, so in our case, so for my team, it has been a step-by-step journey. So somehow maybe I was a bit forward-looking to say, okay, maybe we should do staggered workforce before the circuit breaker. So we, in fact, started much earlier. It was, collaborative, maybe not so, but it was joint discussion. So it was not a top-down decision. It was discussed with the team. I gave them different options. So we talked about, do they want to go 1 week, 1 week, 2 week, 2 weeks, 2 days, 3 days. Some people stay in office, so we debated it. We started with a simple staggered, so 1 week, 1 week. Then we did some learning after 2 weeks. So does it work? Does it not work? We discussed it. And then we continue. We decided it's finally not so bad. So we decided to continue on. And thus, when came the time to say, okay, we have to all work from office, the learning curve was not so steep because most of them had already some form of experience in the previous week. Thus they were already used to handling meetings and communication in a digital way. What you have to keep in mind anyway is we are a global company with a lot of people based in Singapore, but having global role. So they are already used in working with people they don't see every day. So it's part of our working environment. Anyhow, so it's not that it's as disruptive as if you have been only working in office and seeing your colleague all the time and suddenly moving to home. So we had already some form of connected environment. And then, of course, we got some support from our IT department to make the tool of communication more and more convenient. So we started initially with Skype, where you cannot really do a video conf. And then we moved to another software platform, so that where you can already do more videos, so that you can also see the face, so that it's really gives you a almost face-to-face feeling. So I think that's how it worked. Yes, so if I go back to my change curve, there are still people who are in the frustration phase. But this, I think we discussed about it. I think that's and they maybe that's why it's also my purpose to do this sharing session is to give them some inspiration that others had also faced some challenges, also difficult time. But somehow they had rebounds because they also recognize that there is a urgency to change, and thus they found a way forward. And honestly, I mean, 70% of my overall population, so including outside of Singapore, are already embracing the change. So which is quite high figures. So I would see this as a positive sign that humans are also adaptable.
You know, while most companies are downsizing, right, Roxanne, how is it that AMS is still hiring, more staff? Especially when it was reported that recently you actually hired some of the ex staff from Scoot Airlines, and what I'm just, this was probably my personal question. What do you see as in the airlines stuff that made relevance to a semiconductor company like yours?
Okay. So I think so. First, you have to see they were hired as operators, so to work in our manufacturing line. And it's part of our process.
So sorry, Roxanne. These are not the cabin crews.
Yeah.
Are these cabin? Yeah. The cabin crews.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they come on board. They get training. So they get trained. They get so before they go into the line, we have 2 weeks. So depend on the line. We have a 2-week certification program, so that people are accompanied and not drop by themselves into an environment they don't know. I think in our lines, so we are in a clean room concept with a lot of standing time. So in this way, I think it's maybe not as glamorous as an airplane, maybe, but it's similar challenges of long-standing hours and working in an environment where you have quite some noise because of all the clean, so you have to recycle the air, so that's the circumstances of a clean room where you are maybe not seeing the light. So I worked in a wafer fab before, and it's true that you start the morning early and you don't really see the daylight throughout the day. And I think that in this case, the airline industry has similar circumstances. So in this way, maybe not as disruptive as if you pick somebody who is working in a farm in open air and you bring him into a clean room. So I think that's how it's worked quite well, and somehow it's a win-win for all parties. So it works for us and it's also worked for them. But we really, anyway, whether you come from an airline or whether you come from another sector, the most important for us is to make sure that people are properly trained and certified before they get to work. And I think that's also the most important thing to do when you get people who might not be so familiar originally with the industry.
Thank you very much, Roxanne. Final question, your parting words, recommendation, and perhaps to not just to the industry at large, but maybe to some of the SME audience that is with us here today, with regards to how to build greater responsiveness and resilience into their supply chain. Mm-hmm. What would you advise here?
So maybe I would say on two angles. So the first angle is I can appreciate that most of the SMEs might not have a BCP simply because the business went ramping and the most important was to continue to grow. And since the environment was very promising, it never came as an important point to have a BCP. And the BCP can start small, so it doesn't need to be 30 pages with a lot of elements. I think it can start small and get enhanced through time. That's also what we do. As I mentioned before, we will relook at the one we have and incorporate some of the learning we've done in the during this crisis. So what I would really suggest is to take this chance to put some thought together based on how the company, so the company fares through this crisis, what worked, what didn't work, and what could be done better, and to really articulate that in a preliminary document so that there is the first embryon of future BCP. So again, any experience is an opportunity to learn for all of us, be it MNC or be it an SME. And I think most of us have a lot of reflections throughout this whole journey. And I think it's worth to spend the time to document those reflections and to put them into a plan so that should there be another disruption coming later, at least there is always this document to refer back to say, oh yes, we had this war room concept where we were meeting every day at 8 a.m. to check what was, to do a closed check of what was happening the day before. And so next time come a crisis, you know, oh, okay, then I do my war room from day one. And thus you get really the agility and the speed. So this is I think point number one. Point number two is, as I said before, I think partnership is important during crisis. And sometimes, of course, maybe as SME, you might see your neighbor as your competitor. So let's take the case maybe of the road freight in Singapore. So you feel you have your own truck, you have your own workforce, and the neighbor has his own truck and his own workforce. And then you might not want to think about sharing. But then when you have resource constraints, what to do? At the end of the day, I think what is important in crisis is to manage your customer. And if managing your customer means that you might want to partner with another for a certain period of time to be able to still deliver, I think that might be something advisable to think about, because a satisfied customer or a customer who feels that so any customer can understand that things are difficult during crisis. I think the importance is to make sure to manage expectation and to deliver to promise. And if this means in some ways to partner with somebody else, so be it, because at the end of the day, then a happy customer or well-managed customer during crisis is a returning customer.
Thank you so much, Roxanne, for sharing with us your insights and also for taking the questions as well. We have, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the breakout session. And for the audience, if you still have questions that you may be too shy to ask, please don't worry. You can still join us Interchange community platform, where you can post your comments, interact with other participants, and join in discussions as well. Once again, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in Interchange after this session and having you join us in future episodes. Thank you very much.